live. And we are live. Okay. Well, hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Millikin from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And sorry for our fashionably late start here. One of the contributors, Penny Mickelbury, should be with us momentarily, but really excited to have this virtual event celebrating the release of South Central Noir from Akashic Books. By the way, what a great cover.
Yeah, it is.
Terrific cover.
Pretty good.
Yeah, featuring longtime friend Gary Phillips, who edited the book and has edited many anthologies, and prolific story writer, novelist, etc. Naomi Hirahara joins us. Welcome, Naomi. Latest book is, I have up here, Clark and Division. Great to have you with us. And Gar Anthony Haywood, award-winning short story and novelist. Great to see you again, Gar. It's been a long time. Yeah. And Penny should be here with us in just a moment. But, you know, if ever there was an anthology or an area that begged for one of these Akashic anthologies, South Central is it. Did you pitch the anthology, Gary?
Yeah, I guess it would. Now it's funny how, well, as you get older, the years run together. But I guess it was a couple of years ago, or maybe not quite a couple of years ago. It was 18 or 19 months ago. Anyway, I just sent an email to Johnny Temple, who's the publisher of Akashic. And, Johnny and I have a long, I don't know if it's fruitful, but we have a long relationship. And it was just really, I don't know, for some reason, I guess started thinking about it. And I thought, well, you've never done what about a South Central Noir? And Johnny liked the idea. And really it was just those, just that. But then he said, look, the queue is pretty full and we got a lot of books to kind of get out, and, hit me back in about 6 months and let's see what we can do. And, 6 months roll around and I can hear him. I broached the stuff. Can you hear us, Penny?
I hear you.
Now we can hear you.
Hey, we can
but
hear
now
you.
You got a little echo. But anyway, so I broached the subject with him again in 6 months, and he said, okay, and how about, just so I can, talk it through with the staff, talk about some landmarks within the borders and how you're defining South Central. So I did that. I did a kind of a little, not really a sales pitch, but really more just an idea about, I talked about the area. I talked about some of the famous and infamous happenings in South Central. And then I sort of defined it as a sort of this 33-mile square, so in a much larger sense, I defined South Central, and then we're off to the races.
One of the things, that's so cool about this series of anthologies, is that, you really get kind of a street level view of what's happening in world cities, by reading these books, and one of the things that I like the whole philosophy of it, to have, stories set in different time periods.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny's very, his whole philosophy is very careful to have an accurate, or as close to accurate as possible, ethnic representation of the people who actually live in the community. How did you assign the different pieces, or did you kind of float them out there?
No, I just sort of, when I, approached these fine folks, I just said, pretty much what I just said there, and I might have sent, I guess maybe I sent that sheet along, or anyway. But yes, talked about the area, and we just talked about whatever landmarks that were on their minds, and then just let the folks pick whatever they wanted to do, and as you just sort of intimated, various time periods. Yes. Were chosen, which I didn't say one way or the other, but it worked because, like, Emery Holmes is not with us, but his story is set at the Dunbar, kind of at the height of the Dunbar. The Dunbar is still around, but it's in a different formation. But it's really about where his story is set is back when the Central Avenue was called the Stem, and you have the jazz clubs, and the Dunbar was sort of there were several black hotels, but the Dunbar was considered the black hotel in Los Angeles.
Right. Well, why don't you go ahead and take the lead, Gary, as far as talking to your contributors. I'll Although I must say, I loved all three of your stories. And maybe we can start with Gar because,
Yeah.
wonderful story, All That Glitters, and the Watts Towers seems to me kind of represent so much about Los Angeles, the kind of surreality of LA. Some of us know a guy named John Shannon, who's a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
He's done these kind of interesting tours of LA. And I remember one of the spots we went to was Watts Towers. But the story has pathos. It has everything. Can you talk a little bit about your story, Gar? You are muted, sir.
I was just commending you on your wisdom and your.
Uh-oh. Is he talking? But
Gar, you're still muted. Not sure what's going on.
I don't know, but he doesn't have a line in his thing.
Yeah.
We can't hear you, Gar.
Oh, you can't hear me? Yeah.
Now we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Should I try again?
Yeah.
There we go.
Start from the top. Okay.
Yeah.
As they say in Hollywood. My dad was an architect before he passed away, and he was very big in the LA landmarks. And so whenever we went out on the weekends, he always had us visiting one, relatively famous LA landmark or another, especially if it had some kind of architectural or historical value. So, the Watts Towers was easily one of our regular haunts. And as you mentioned, Patrick, it's to me, it's a magical place. It's always, the very idea, I don't think you can say enough about how impressive it is that one man, created all of this and, took it upon himself to build this thing, without anyone else's help, essentially from scrap, from things that people throw away. That's kind of metaphorical all in itself. The idea that, taking LA's refuse and building something wonderful from it. I just always have been fascinated by the place. So when Gary, approached me about a story, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Isn't that right, Gary? I don't think I.
No, it's true. That's right. You're very clear. Yeah.
It was mine. Yeah. So just the idea of a guy that works there and somebody that, is a regular visitor, and there's, components of mystery and possible murder and that sort of thing. It all sort of worked together to create a great story. So I'm very proud to have it included in the anthology, and I hope actually that it'll create more interest in the towers than there already is, because I think it deserves every accolade and every bit of attention that it receives. It's a wonderful architectural landmark.
And it was created over a 30-year period. Is that right? From the 20s, early 20s to when did you finish it in the 50s?
Yeah, Sam Rodriguez, yes, or Simon Rodriguez. Yeah, I believe so. And it's worth noting, and I read this in some fashion or in something, research from something else. I guess in the late 50s, there was a Friends, I guess still there's a Friends of the Watts Towers kind of organization. But in that period of time, the city was making, because as Gar talked about, Rodriguez, who put it together, he never got a permit, and he was kind of a cantankerous guy, but he put that thing together, right? And there's there's 17 towers. The tallest one is almost 100 feet, and so the city was going to knock it down, and so the Friends hired a mechanical engineer who did some kind of stress test, or whatever. Point being that he could prove that it was architecturally and structurally sound.
It wasn't coming down anytime soon.
That's right. It wasn't coming anytime soon yet.
Well, Gary, why don't you go ahead and take the lead, and I'll jump in.
Well, we should just ask. Well, as you already started, we should just ask people about their stories. And so on my screen, I've got Penny here. So I'll ask Penny Mickelbury about her story, May's family dining. So Penny, why don't you talk a little bit about May and how you came to that story?
Looks like you're muted, Penny.
Yeah, you are this time.
Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
I am a relative newcomer to Los Angeles relative to you guys, because you all are natives, most of you. Gary, you've been here since a kid. You grew up
No, I'm a
here.
native. I was born here.
You were born here, okay.
Yeah.
Naomi is a native. So I came here relatively recently, but my family, my father's family, were part of that great migration out of the South. They were from Louisiana, and they left. I mean, running. They left Louisiana running, and they ran. They didn't get too far. They got to Texas on the first run, and for half of them, Texas wasn't much better than Louisiana. But then World War II caught them in Texas, and so many of them. Well, the men went to war. They went to the army, and two of my aunts, the oldest two of my father's sisters, came here
Mm.
because there was, and I don't know how black folk got news, but they got news, and that the men were all gone and women were being hired in factories
Hmm.
in in Los Angeles, and they could get good jobs, good paying jobs that weren't cleaning up behind somebody.
Hmm.
So his two oldest sisters came out here, and then when the war was over, three of the brothers, there were 10 kids in my father's family, and they came out here. The others stayed in Texas, except my father, who had read an article somewhere about a college for black men in Atlanta. And he said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to college. Okay. And he got on a bus. He bought himself a suit and a bus ticket and went to Atlanta, which is how it happens that Atlanta is my hometown. But half of them came here. And so, and two of his brothers who were here were his favorite brothers. So there were always these stories about Los Angeles. And I grew up hearing these stories. I did not know these people until very much later, but I heard these stories. And one of the biggest stories about Louisiana people is who's the best cook. And they all claim to be the best. And so the idea of this story, when Gary presented this wonderful opportunity for a story, I thought it's got to be about my people. It's got to be about these people who came to Los Angeles with the hope and the belief that living here had to be better than living in Louisiana, that there was more opportunity here, but the cooking and the eating came with them. Okay. that was a part of everything, and to this day it remains a part of everything, cooking and eating. And then of course, because I write mysteries, somebody had to get dead, and that's sort of in my DNA, my writing DNA. So you got to kill somebody, and like that. So
Well, it's
and
a great portrait of a changing time too, set in that Vietnam period. Yeah.
Yeah, but I enjoyed learning more about Los Angeles than I knew. I mean, I knew what you read in books, the history stuff, but to get beneath that, and to get street level, to get where people lived, where people grew up, where what areas were called, what streets were called, where people could live and where people could not live. Because even though a lot of people left the South, some of the South followed right along with them, because a lot, we weren't the only people leaving hard times,
Right.
so. But I liked writing that story. and then I like eating and cooking too. So that was not a stretch for me.
Well, May's restaurant, you know, is such an important kind of community anchor, you know, and
Hmm.
you know, kind of holding the community together in a certain way. There's a place here in Phoenix called Mrs. White's Golden Rule Cafe that reminds me of the restaurant in your story. It's
Hmm.
been here since I want to say the early '60s,
Oh wow.
and yeah, so
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah, yeah, and I like that about that character May. It the place is about eating, so everybody come in and eat and behave yourself.
Right.
You know, you don't get to talk about people. You come here to eat, so just eat and leave people alone. And it doesn't matter what they did last night or might do tonight. That's not the point. Right now, they're eating. Everybody's here to eat.
Have you
And
considered, Penny, has this kind of whetted your appetite for maybe some more stories or even a novel featuring May?
um, not necessarily featuring May, but a May-like character. I'm working on a
Yeah.
novel right now set in Harlem in the 1950s,
Mm.
mid 1950s, and central to the people in this novel, the principal characters are um, it's more of a carry out than it is a sit down place, but it's where everybody goes to pick up dinner and to pick up lunch, and it is and the woman knows everybody. Everybody knows her. She's looked after by the community, and one of her biggest customers is uh, Stephanie St. Clair, the queen of Harlem.
Yeah.
You know, and 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 her guys, her soldiers, make certain that nobody she's never been robbed. You know, she's never been hurt, because Madame St. Clair's guys make certain that nobody bothers her. And I think that's real important too, because Harlem in the 1950s, the black people, these were Jim Crow refugees, and they were running from the South, and they didn't have anything when they left, and they didn't have anything when they got to New York, but a love of food. And you know, I think good food is.
And that whole bebop scene was at its perfect point in New York at that '50s, right?
Oh,
'50s, early
music,
'60s.
music, jazz,
Yeah.
nightclubs, you know, stomping at the Savoy, you know, Small's Paradise. And of course, there was the Cotton Club, which black people could not enter.
Yeah. Which is yeah.
You know, which is,
Well, they could, but they had to be in the balcony.
yeah, or go in the back door,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, but you certainly, you could not sit on the dance floor and
I think
dance.
at some point it finally got integrated, but certainly for some period of time it was not.
But it was way late. That was
Yeah. Yeah.
way,
That's
that
right.
was late in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess that's
yeah,
right. I guess that's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Even,
remember reading
Well,
about,
Scorsese
you know,
integrated it, didn't
excuse
it?
me.
I'm
Huh?
sorry.
Wasn't that Scorsese that integrated the Cotton Club?
Might have been. Maybe that's what I'm thinking about.
Might
Yeah,
have
right.
been.
It
Yeah,
might
but
have
no,
been in the
I
movie.
love
Yeah.
reading about
in the movie, yeah, that
about
was way
Benny, you know,
in.
Benny Goodman and you know, young Charlie Christian playing with
Yeah.
Benny Goodman and then going uptown after
Yeah,
hours and having those
after
wonderful
hours.
jam
Yeah,
sessions. Wow.
but Lena Horne and Pearl Bailey, the headliners, had to go in the kitchen door. I mean, they could not walk in the front door of the
Yeah.
Cotton Club to perform. They had to go in the kitchen door of the Cotton Club to perform, which, you know, but the Savoy ballroom, anybody could go if you were properly dressed and had the 50 or 85 cents required to get in. Anybody, yeah, that's what it called. 85 cents on the weekends. You know, and this is mid 1950s, right after the end of the Korean War. but the food and cooking are, and I suppose that's not just Black people, but ethnic people. Food is central to life and living. Um, and if you can cook, you can get over. And if you're a bad cook, you kind of have to. You
Well, the
kind of have to.
restaurant is a hub where a cross section of society comes together,
Yes. Yeah.
and so your characters can bump elbows with whomever. It's a great setting.
And especially if Madam St. Clair's guys are taking care of the door, making sure that nobody misbehaves themselves.
And when Gary, when is Matthew Henson? Is he? Could there be any cross pollination, or is he already gone by then?
No, he's well. Interesting enough, Stephanie St. Clair does show up in the Henson novel, but the Henson novel sets the period of the Harlem Renaissance, so it's 28, 29, right before the crash.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking an aging Matthew Henson could appear in Penny's Penny's novel. Well, and movie theater also, as a segue into talking to Naomi here, that's also a similar kind of thing. Can you talk about your story, Naomi?
Yeah, I was just thinking as during this discussion, about movies. That's so reflective of Los Angeles, and so that's a real movie theater, the Kokusai. I've when it was in operation, I had seen a few Japanese samurai movies there, and and Kareem did, he was, everyone knew that he liked those kind of movies and was a regular customer during his UCLA days. So I kind of liked how this place, the Kokusai, could represent a cross section, like different ethnic groups, racial groups kind of interacting. And and because I was working at the Japanese American newspaper, the Rafushimpo, when it closed, so I actually wrote articles about the closure. And now it's been taken over by a big church from across the street, and they use it for probably religious purposes. But whenever I drive on that street, Crenshaw, I was going, oh, do people even realize that there was a Japanese? I mean, it had a lot of different iterations. It wasn't just a Japanese movie theater, but it was at one time. And just to think that in the Crenshaw district, that's where, and like Paula Woods from the LA Times, who wrote about our book, she, has very fond memories of being introduced to Japanese culture at the Kokusai as well. So, like in this conversation, it's just interesting about talking about diaspora, like, the maker of the Watts Towers. I think he was an immigrant, right? Was he an Italian immigrant?
Italian, yeah.
And then just the diaspora from the deep South, Blacks coming into LA and Japanese Americans.
Yeah.
And we're talking about racial covenants, before World War II and after World War II, so definitely the incarceration of Japanese Americans, they come to play in the story of like South Central, because that was one of the few neighborhoods that, Japanese Americans could easily move into. It was either Crenshaw or else Boyle Heights, which is in the eastern part. It's like east, next to East Los Angeles. So, it was a very, it's like people who are basically, they either fled or they got kicked out of other places, and they, find themselves together, and I think these days, and I mean, unfortunately, I think Los Angeles is pretty segregated now. I think in some ways it's become more racially segregated than in the past, and we've kind of forgotten that at one time, many of us, my dad was a blue collar worker, was a gardener, we were all kind of living together, trying to make our way. And there was a genuine, there was genuine friendship and sharing of culture. I know Gary, feels this way because there's always some like Japanese American character in his short stories. It just like comes out, because that's what we remember. And I'm from Southern California, but not LA. I grew up in Pasadena, and that was one of the first neighborhoods or school districts in Southern California that had forced integration. So this whole question of Black, white, and kind of Asian relations, was part of my upbringing. So it's something that I have a genuine interest and I guess experience with.
And when did the theater itself close? I think was it 1986?
I believe so. Yeah.
Right around that time period.
Yeah, it was that time. And it was, so at that point, a lot of the Japanese were moving out. And that's what I kind of referred to. Like there was a Japanese language school, but a lot of people were coming in from other parts of LA. They no longer really lived there. So, and the whole thing about the VHS, there's like some salacious kind of videotapes that were part of this whole conversation. And that was actually part of something that our newspaper covered, and I came pretty close to someone I believe was part of the Yakuza, in the 1980s. It's not as common now, but there was a time period, in LA history that there were like these Japanese gangsters. I mean, they weren't necessarily walking around with their shirts off with a bunch of tattoos, but they were out there. And I thought, if I'm going to put crime in there, it would be really fun to put that little bit of history in there as well.
And it's quite a coming of age story as well,
Yeah, and it's a loss of innocence.
Yeah.
But he's also, but he still wants to kind of, and it's just in his mind, he wants to be the protector. He wants to be this Yojimbo, and he's, and then
the Bushido code.
Yeah, the woman he's trying to protect, that is old enough to be his mother and has no interest in what he's romanticizing. So that's what I thought was interesting too, like how different people can have expectations, and there's gender issues too, right? That come into play. So.
But really, the kid in I Am Yojimbo in Naomi's story is quite hard. I mean, listen, all the stories are great. They cover a very interesting range of territory and emotions, and you have the kind of very fraught relationship in Gar's story between the two brothers, and one brother is, I guess the proper term is mentally challenged, and as Penny talked about in her story, but really the kid, in some ways I identify with this poor sort of lost kid who's he has this fascination, but like anybody, you just kind of are interested in these other things that are outside your own world and outside your own realm, and and you sort of adopt them, but it's very well done. It's really I thought it was a really good portrait of this kid. Yeah, it is coming of age, but where you don't, she really does capture him at that age.
Where you're just absorbing all this material.
Right.
For you, Gary, was it comic books and movies and music and everything?
Yeah, it was all that. It was those Twilight Zone episodes watched endlessly, and it's so funny now. Now I'm as an old man sitting there, at night watching Me TV and Me TV Plus, I might add. Watching Have Gun Will Travel Again, which I only vaguely remember as a kid, right? Because even I was a little too young then, but I do remember. I remember it's nostalgic for me, and I've seen episodes, since then, but it's really nostalgic for me because what I really recall is me and my dad. My dad wasn't much of a TV watcher. That was one of the few shows that he and I would watch together. And of course, I remember nothing of those shows. Now I'm seeing them again 100 times, but I don't remember anything about that. But I just remember it was just this great feeling, just thinking about me and my pop just sitting there watching this show. that was, clearly over my head, right? Because, it's kind of had this sort of heavy, gravitas to it. But just the idea that, it's come back around again. And of course, I just hasten to add that when my grandson, one time he came in the living room and, I'm watching one of them, of course he shows her in black and white. He says, well, oh, is the TV broken? No, no, boy, this is how shows used to be.
Right.
So anyway.
Well, tell us a little bit, Gary, about your story.
That's how life used to be.
That's right. That's it. Exactly.
Before you were born, everything was black and white.
Everything was black and white, kid. I'm sorry. What did you say, Patrick?
I just said, tell us a little bit about your story.
Oh, so my story is called Death of a Sideman, and the character in it is this guy named McGrady, and McGrady had shown up. I had written a novella with McGrady from a few years ago. He's a Vietnam vet. He had been off and on, been homeless at times, off and on. He'd been in the bottle, but now he's sort of sobered up, and he's been sober for some time. And anyway, the long story short is it starts at the world stage, but that's not really the setting for the story. But the story starts at the world stage in Leimert Park, and this cat that he's known. Actually, they were in Vietnam together. I mean, they were in Vietnam. They weren't in the same unit. But they ran across each other because then there's a flashback to what was called Soul Alley, which was like this sort of string of dive bars and little nightclubs in this little few blocks of Saigon where all the black GIs would hang out. And so there's a sort of flashback to Soul Alley and kind of how these guys knew each other from that time period and had gone their separate ways, and every once in a while had seen each other over a period of time, over the period of years. And of course, as Penny mentioned, listen, these are South Central Noir, so these are stories about some hard times and hard things happening. And this guy, McGrady, goes back to hang out at the guy's pad one night after the gig, and the guy up and dies. But things are revealed, and then slowly these things are, these layers are pulled back, and part of what's revealed, of course, is the dead man's life and things that McGrady didn't know. And then we also get a little bit more glimpse into McGrady's past life.
Very cool. Let's see here. I mean, obviously there are a number of other stories in the book. Can you talk maybe just briefly about some of your favorites and who else is in the book? There's some great stories. Steph Shaw, Larry Fine.
There are all my favorites, Patrick. There are no first among equals. But yes, it's just a great. I was just so pleased with. I give very little. Like I said, I just ask folks. I say please pick a location or a landmark or something. So we kind of get in and around South Central, and from that, people just went to town. I mean, it's just such a testament, I think, to the imagination and the skill of the writers who came on board, who took on this challenge, and just as I've said before, I mean, they brought their A game. Nobody was sloughing it off. Nobody was half stepping. And I just think it really is. I just think it's been, we've gotten some lovely reviews in various places, Publishers Weekly and some other spots, and LA Times, as Nori mentioned, did this lovely piece that Paula Woods put together about us. And so, no, I just been really so pleased with, obviously with the stories, but also with the reception. And I think that it resonates, with a wide audience.
Absolutely. By the way, when is Paula going to write another damn novel?
I think she's sworn off writing fiction, I believe. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I
wouldn't say that, Gary.
All right, there we go. Okay, excellent. Okay, there you go.
I think Gary did a really good job. I feel with, as you always do, Gary, with South Central Noir. I'm glad that you got stories like from Jerry Westerson, who had actually, grown up in South Central, and I think when people, you also show the transition, and you included like Robert Lovato's and Desiree Zamorano's story.
Right, exactly.
And I think people who don't know South Central, it just might be the Black experience
Yes.
in their mind. And
Yeah.
I think you seem very intentional to kind of reflect all the varied communities.
Well, hopefully, yes. I mean, right. In that, hopefully, in that regard, that right is exactly is shown through the writers who came to the table, who came to play, and kind of having a sense. And I would say that for Roberto Lovato, and Roberto and I go back a long ways in terms of sort of social change kind of work. And his memoir, of course, has been well received, and I believe it was on the New York Times bestseller list. But this was his first foray into fiction. He'd already been thinking about it, and he and I had various discussions about the story and some structural questions that we discussed, as well as in kind of where to sort of take it. But I think he really did a great job. But from that, he's branching out more into that kind of writing. So yeah, I just really think that, as I said, I mean, I think everybody was just came to play.
Yeah, it's a very inspired. Feels really inspired, and stories are awesome. Question for you, Gary, about with Akashic, they usually want you to divide the pieces up in some particular way. And in this case, you've got these 3 parts: always and forever, cold sweat, and the world is ghetto. When I've only done 2 anthologies, but it's very important, I realize, to the way you order the stories. You're taking the reader on a particular journey.
Yeah.
And having them in a particular order is very important. Did you play around with that quite a bit?
Yeah, I don't know, we didn't play around with it too much, but I will say, listen, Johnny is an old hand at this now, right? I mean, good God, he's got, what is it, more than 100, right? Isn't there more than 100 of these noir, you've done Phoenix Noir, and I did Orange County Noir, LA Noir, Mumbai Noir, Indian, etc. So at first I think I had like 4 different categories. And then, so Johnny had a reshuffle, and we reshuffled that, and then we kind of switched some titles. Moved some titles around, and then finally came to kind of our headings and kind of our groupings. But yeah, but it was a good process. I guess that's the point. It wasn't particularly laborious. It was a little bit of back and forth, obviously through email and stuff, but nothing particularly drawn out. So that I think what we came to, I think, works. Yeah.
Right. Well, what do you think? Why don't we have each of you talk a little bit about what your current projects, what you're working on, and maybe what's coming next. Gary, I know you've got tons of stuff all the time. So.
Well, let's go back to Gar. We haven't heard from him in a while.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been muted. Every time I talk, something goes wrong. So. No, before we get to me, one of the things I did want to touch on was that one of the things I'm most proud of and appreciative of being included in this particular anthology is that I think, as you guys have pointed out, the range of stories and the topics and the time period is basically time travel, a time traveling, journey through South Central.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of people, I would imagine, even now, and I think Naomi pointed it out or referred to this, is that, South Central to a lot of people, quote unquote, means Black people and crack cocaine, right? If you watch television shows on Fox, you would think that's all it was. Oh, I'm sorry, Gary, that's your show. But no, on a serious note, I think that in terms of its educational value, I think anthology, could open a lot of eyes and would, leave people with a different impression when they hear those 2, how many words is that, South Central? Yeah, those 2 words put together, because it doesn't mean what a lot of people think it means. It's a place with a lot of history. I can't imagine that anybody hesitated to say yes when you invited them. I know that, I usually tell all the time, but in this particular case,
there you go.
I was like, yeah, because, as we've demonstrated, there are all kinds of places that we didn't even get to.
That's right.
If ever one of these anthologies called out for a second volume, I would think South Central would be the place.
Yeah.
I could think of at least 2 or 3 right now.
Yeah.
That we didn't actually include that we could have. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, just getting back to your original question, Patrick. My agent is shopping a book right now called Queen's Run, which is about a retired female black cop in LA. Finds out that she has cancer, and rather than go through chemo and radiation and all that kind of stuff that may kill her anyway, she decides to go back to Los Angeles, where she was a cop, and enact some revenge in the hope of getting killed like that. So, how's that for a weird?
Sounds fantastic. Yeah. Let's see. Well, Penny, you mentioned a little bit about your work in progress. How far along into that novel are you?
I am really close to being finished. And as often happens, when you can see, or you think you can see the finish line, all this stuff comes up, and it's like, well, you didn't include this, and you didn't include this, and it is such a rich period, and there is so much history, but it's only one book. And when I and I'm not much for, I don't really outline, except as I have had more and more birthdays, it has become more and more necessary for me to have a plan so that I don't lose myself where I'm going. But I had a specific objective in mind with this book, which was to introduce people on all levels within that environment, within that Harlem environment. So there are, of course, the artists and the musicians and the people struggling to make a way out of no way. But there is also a Black female OBGYN, one of the first graduates of Columbia University Med School, who sees it as a mission to make certain that people get proper medical care. Everything has frozen up. Are you there? Okay.
We can hear you. Yep.
Okay. So I want to make a whole thing, not just the thing that everybody thinks they know. It's kind of like what Gar was saying about South Central. It's like, oh, must be drug dealers and murderers. And Harlem was so much more than that. There were so many things. People think, oh, well, there was the Harlem Renaissance, but that was over. Well, no, it actually wasn't over. It was, I sort of see it as the beginning. It is where things began to jump off. But yes, there are all of these people who came thinking that there has to be something better than what we're leaving. And there were people there who said, yeah, there is a way, but yeah, it's tough and it ain't easy, and we'll figure it out. And that kind of is what I want this novel to be, is the part of the figuring out of what happens in an environment where there are people who believe that, gee, it's just not worth it to try. And there are people who believe that if you don't try, then maybe you're in the wrong place, because this is a place about trying.
Mm.
And then, of course, because it's me, some people get dead. And I suppose I just can't help that. And I have called this story Payback, but using Pig Latin.
Hmm.
So Akbe is itch bay.
Hmm.
Which is, and I don't know if my publisher's going to let me get away with that, but it is, payback is a bitch, and that is sort of what underlines this, because people, there are people like some of the people who worked for Madam Queen and some other people who just think that people have gotten away with way too much. And so they think that we need to put a stop to some of that. So Akbe is itch bay.
Have you read? I'm sure you've all read the this wonderful the Harlem Domestic series by Chester Himes. Set a little bit later, maybe right in the 50s, late 50s and 60s.
Late 50s, yeah.
Yeah, great. Naomi, what
Yeah,
you got cooking?
A follow-up to Clark and Division. Only it's going to be taking place in 1946, Los Angeles. So actually, what this discussion is very much related. Chester Himes is mentioned because he actually wrote one of his first novels in the home of a Nisei woman who had been incarcerated.
Is that right?
So he's mentioned there. When He Hollers, Let Him Go. That came out in 1946.
That's right.
So and then I'm also talking about Little Tokyo, which was called Bronzeville during the war, because like what Penny was talking about, all these blacks from the Deep South came over to Los Angeles to work in, Walter Mosley has included it in his books, to work in defense, but they had no place to live, right? Because there were racial covenants. But then the authorities were, we have this one area right by City Hall that doesn't have any people in it. Why don't you live there? So it just, it's super interesting. So that's what I'm writing. I'm doing the rewrites right now, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited about it. It'll be coming out in August of next year.
Well,
Great.
Do you have a title?
It's called Evergreen. Which refers to, in Boyle Heights, there's a street called Evergreen.
That's right.
Where there was, the cemetery and
still is.
Yeah, and there were Japanese American churches and hostels that were all there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Gary, what all do you have going?
Well, also, Naomi and I are both published by Soho Crime. I finished the draft of the second One Shot Harry book, which now is set. The first one was set in 63. This one is set in 65. And of course, we dropped right into the beginning, or right into the heart of the Watts uprising, the Watts riots, depending on how you want to view it. And Harry, of course, is once again in the middle. Harry, of course, is once again getting his butt kicked by the cops. Harry's a crime photographer. I should mention for people who might not know. And then but he captures something on film, kind of a bit of retro echoing of today's capturing such events on your cell phone camera. But then we're off to the races. So I'm waiting on words from my editor. The dear Juliet, as I'll delve into the rewrites, and then because it did get mentioned in a sideways way, this will be our sixth and final season of Snowfall, which is about crack and the CIA in 1980s South Central, and we're gonna not to give anything away, but I guess we're going to burn it all up, folks. So there you go.
Yeah, you got to undo all the great work that we did with the anthology now.
That's right. Hey, well, exactly. That's right. That's pretty much it. That's true. That's true. Oh man.
So 65. Vietnam's obviously heating up.
Vietnam's heating up, and the hippie scene is kind of happening. And I thread through the story, the Free Press. That was kind of this hippie paper. It had some purchase in those days. I mean, eventually, what destroyed the. Interesting enough was that they actually Art Kunkin was the publisher, and he published the names and I believe maybe even the addresses of like a whole bunch of undercover narcs, and so of course he got sued up and down, and that's what really destroyed the paper. But he had guts. He didn't have much sense, but he had guts. So we don't quite go that far. But anyway, there's a character, Jerry Tackwood, who's a part-time reporter for the Free Press. And he and Harry are kind of buddies, and they're kind of running around. And so the Free Press is mentioned. Hippie scene is coming on. There's even kind of a happening toward the end of the book that kind of brings some of the elements all together. So I had a lot of fun, once again, sort of delving into some research. And I should give a shout out. I've given a shout out to the other books that I've used in my research. And then this time around, I particularly leaned on what's it called? It's by John Wiener and Mike Davis. Fire in the Streets. So it's about LA in the 60s. So it's a massive book from Verso, but it's wonderful, chock block full of just, very little anecdotes and asides. And it's it was just great to be able to call on some of that stuff and rearrange it and reconfigure it and put it and shoot it through this book.
Is that City of Quartz, Mike Davis?
That's City of Quartz, Mike Davis? Yes.
Yeah.
Who unfortunately is actually has this terminal cancer, and I'm not telling tales out of school because he has now written about it, and he's published. He's published a very heartfelt, very harrowing, yet uplifting piece in the LA Times about it. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So much history. One thing I wanted to ask you before, the hour's flown by, but I wanted to ask you all about, anthologies. Do you think that, because I'm so fascinated with the Central Avenue scene in particular in its heyday, and, the music that came out of there and that history is just, there have been, some academic histories of that. Do you think an anthology based around that scene would be too specific probably?
I don't know, Patrick. I think you're right. You could have every story sort of start on the avenue or wind up in parts of it or in there, but you would have to, obviously you'd have to still go away from it at some point or go to other areas. But certainly it is the case. And this is evidence in some of the stories in the book. I mentioned Emery's and Eric Stone's collections is also set in and along Central or in and off Central. So yeah, it is certainly possible that you could have Central as a kind of running, literally this running thread through the stories, but you obviously have to be able to take, people into, either behind the scenes or, into the kitchen or, opening the morning after and, just sweeping up the club or the house that's, 4 blocks down or, whatever it is. But yeah, I think it could be done. But
or the restaurant.
Huh?
Or the restaurant.
Yes. Restaurant. Exactly.
So many
right.
stories and,
right.
Yeah. When did that whole era sort of peter out completely? Was it gone by the late 60s?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I know this much. I know the It Club was still in existence, 64, 65, but by then it was pretty much all gone. Yes.
Gotcha.
There were still jazz clubs, but they were like the Parisian Room and other places like that. But they weren't along Central.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you so much. It's been such a treat to talk to you all. And Gar, I'm sorry you kind of got short shrift in this in this interview. We should do a program just with you.
There you go.
Yeah.
How do you figure that, Patrick? I feel like I think you overworked me.
Well, I'd love to see you all out here in the desert in person at some point. It's great to be doing live events again. So
Dig it.
Yes.
Haywood.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you, Patrick.
Thank you all so much. And
Thank
for
you.
watching. This is the wonderful anthology we've been discussing, and we have copies here at the Poison Pen, of course. But thanks again, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you,
It was a
everybody.
nice discussion.
Thanks, Patrick.
I'm here.
Thank you.
All right, y'all.
Bye, Patrick.
Bye.
See you.
Take care.
We'll eat at